In the early days of recording, getting a live sound balance on a number of performers and recording it to tape in mono or stereo completed the sound recording process. Ever since we've been able to record instruments or groups of instruments on their own tracks and overdub new material onto existing recordings, we've then had to rebalance them for the final piece of music that people hear in the real world. This really is a delicate balancing act, a continual adjustment of levels, tones, textures and placements until the final recipe is to our liking. The final mix is the point where we let go and commit our work for the ears of the masses. Mixing can be the make or break point of a hit, and the mix, depending on its complexity, can take many hours or even days of studio time.
The mix is extremely subjective and is often the source of conflicts between musicians, producers, engineers, and record company A&R departments. Often, a label will take on fresh ears for a mix and employ the star mix engineer of the week to hopefully create a dazzling finished product.
You know, I just went through a record where it was appropriate for a mixer out of Nashville to mix the record. It was better for that format. You know, you have to be a team player. You have to know what's best for the project.
Nowadays, mixing can also be regarded as something of a formality because all the balance subtleties have already been addressed in the DAW during recording. But if you do want to reassess your recording and create a new mix for your final product, there's no fresher or better way to do it than to look at the raw, unprocessed sounds on their own tracks in an environment like this.
Well, this is one of the largest consoles I've ever sat at. It's got 96 channels, and the reason for mainly for this to exist is for the film work that goes on here, which often requires an enormous number of channels. But this building, Record One, is perhaps best known for a gentleman by the name of Michael Jackson, who did an awful lot of work here with my heroes, Bruce Swedien and Quincy Jones. So this building is kind of the American equivalent of Abbey Road in a way. We're going to take the track that we recorded for the DVD, All Our Yesterdays, and come out of the hard disk system, come back into the analog domain and bring up the digital tracks into this analog desk. And we're going to do our mix in the analog domain, bringing each track up on its own fader. The result at the end of the day, of course, we will have to go back into the digital domain to get it back onto our hard disk recording system. Especially if your project might go cross-platform between applications, or it's likely to get handed over to the hotshot mixer of the week, we want to end up with tracks that have the same start time and run continuously as long as they're needed. We've got a track here which within the program it's obvious that it comes in at a particular moment, but if we were to export that to a different DAW program, it would just appear as a file and it wouldn't necessarily be clear where it was meant to be placed. So in order to make sure that it is going to come in at the right moment, we're going to create a region around it which runs for the entire length of the song. Then there's a command in this program called consolidate, which means that it will actually create a track that will run right from the start to the end. It'll take a moment to process it. There it is. So wherever we export that to now, it's going to run from the start of the song and come in the right place. There's another track on this screen right now which has several tracks or several parts, all looking rather fragmented. So we need to create a consolidated track so that all those parts will run continuously as one glued together piece. In other words, we don't want every punched-in vocal phrase to appear in the list of available files. We want all the individual takes of each part or performance to be combined or comped into a single entity, and any unwanted material should just not show up. Well, as you can see from this screen, we've got our project looking very neat and tidy. Everything's consolidated, all the tracks are running from start to finish. But all the unwanted material that we don't use in this session is still on the disc. So it's a good idea to save the project without all the stuff we don't need. So we're now going to view the stuff that's not needed for this particular project, which is, as you might expect, the majority. So we're going to clear all that out and save the project under a new name with only the material that we need to perform our mix with. The important thing is to make this part of your normal working practice, which will ensure you don't incur the wrath of any engineer looking at your work later down the line.
A record's no longer made one place, one idea added on to another. It's like, you make a part, you make a part, you make a part, you make a part. Oh, you're a great guy, you mix here, do it. And that's kind of what I'm getting a lot of, and that's the part that makes it totally not fun, and that takes up a lot of time. Just trying to figure out where all the bones are buried.
You get a drive with no notes. You know, so you're dependent on going into the drive and seeing what the information is, whether it's good or not, whether it's to be used. They don't eliminate files they're not using. Worse than that is that even when you call and say, please consolidate the files before you send them to me, they don't, or it's something they don't think about. And so you get a drive and you open up one of the songs and there's 300 files in there. And every time that happens, I go ballistic.
Even on analog multitracks, a little time spent cleaning up unwanted material will prove to be a benefit. Personal experience with a certain Beatle who was not very careful about erasing unwanted material meant that we spent endless amounts of non-automated mixing time trying to remember to cut tracks that burst forth with "hold it," or "let's try that one more time," or chattering over the intro before the vocals came in. It was a different mindset in those days. If you erased something, it was gone forever. Of course, a mix goes beyond just getting a good balance or a blend of ingredients. We may decide not to use a particular track or tracks in particular places in the song. Or we might need to switch tracks in order to get the best performance of a particular section of the song. So some of our mixing time will be spent selecting or deselecting a track so that it only plays exactly when we need it. Also, we might want to change EQ or other processing during the course of a track. Level changes are almost inevitable to emphasize important passages or boost weak notes or phrases. As veteran record producer Jim Dickinson once observed about what it takes to create a hit, simple, you just turn the good parts up and the bad parts down. Sounds like a philosophy to base an entire career on, and I think I have.
I like coming out multi-channel into the desk and mixing things as an individual item and using analog EQ compressors on the console or plugging in some, you know, vintage bit of gear that I think is going to give me a sound. That's my preferred method, although there are certain plugins that I rely on heavily.
A mix can be done wholly in the digital domain, in the box as it's called, with adjustments made using a mouse or using a controller if you prefer more hands-on communication.
Mixing in the box has its beauties. There's a certain sound to it that's fantastic, actually. But it's not the same thing as mixing through an analog console. I think given the choice, anyone in the world most likely would pick that if they could. Just from the standpoint that the size of the stereo spectrum, the depth and the frequency response and everything that goes with that is definitely better going through an analog console than mixing in the box.
Working purely in the box is by definition an environment that can be automated. Sound and level change commands are written into the song so that each move or adjustment only has to be performed once. The computer will now automatically re-perform these moves every time the moment passes. Although Alan isn't using these facilities today, here at Record One, consoles like this SSL have full recall facilities, including fader movements. With motorized faders, all such movements can be recorded and replayed. Today, though, Alan is using that recording device called the human brain, and those motorized objects called fingers.
The very first track is the bass. Then we have the kick drum, which is separate, but the kick drum is actually representing three different sources. It's the left, Simon's left kick drum, his right kick drum, and that speaker contraption which he'd rigged up. And that's giving some really nice bottom end to the proceedings there. The overheads, left and right. There's the two mics directly over the kit. The snare drum is on its own track there. Hi-hat is also on its own track. I'm going to put that hard right. And then we've got all the tom-toms, which he's not playing now because we're in a chorus.
Likewise, all the other tracks come out of the hard disk, go through a D to A converter, and are then brought up on their own channel on the desk. A low-tech but time-honored masking tape for writing track names completes this otherwise impressively high-tech picture.
Sometimes EQ and intrinsically important effects will already be printed or committed to on tape or disc, but the balance between the component parts needs to be reassessed starting from scratch.
Most engineers will set out by rebalancing the drums. Is the kick drum punchy enough? Is the snare laying a strong enough offbeat? Are the tom fills and cymbal crashes coming through clearly?
I spend a good deal of time working on drums until I get it to the point where I think that everything that goes in after that is going to work well. And then I add instruments and make a mix of an individual instrument to the drums. For me, I'm always listening for the relationship between the bass drum and the bass. And then I'll bring in instrument by instrument, but it's always with relationship to the drums.
A popular technique is to add each instrument one at a time to the drum mix at a level that feels right, gradually building up the mix until all the ingredients are in the mixing bowl in the right proportions. But there are no hard and fast rules.
Okay, I've got a kind of a basic bass and drum balance now. Contrary to what most engineers would do at this point, they would start adding other things. I'm going to take everything that I've put in so far out and then start listening to other things on their own. Personally, I prefer to start with the other instruments in the rhythm section, a technique I learnt from Beatles engineer Geoff Emerick. If all the basic instruments, apart from bass, drums and vocals, are in the correct proportion, not only level-wise but also their position in the stereo picture, I should be able to feel a good balance in the rhythm section, the guitars, the keyboards, percussion and so on. I'll even think about adding in backing vocals and orchestration before finally bringing in the bass and drums and adding the lead vocal and any solo instruments. The basic pad which Rami did on the motif, which is, as you may remember from the basic track session, it was put on for the rest of the band to play to. I'm hearing that that's sounding rather mono, so there's a little trick that we often do when that's the case. If something, that's the left side, that's the right side. When we put them together, it comes straight out of the middle, so it suggests that it was not a particularly stereophonic sound to start with. But one trick that we can do there is to put a small delay to one side. It'll spread it out, so we're going to do that right now. So we've applied an 80 millisecond delay to one side now, and as you can hear, it's made quite a difference to the way that sounds spread out. This is mono, and this is stereo. Other keyboards now, the piano. And that's currently pan center, so I'm going to. There's the right side, there's the left side. It's getting a nice balance between the two there. Now with the pad, we've got the Hammond track as well to bring in, which hasn't come in yet. Let's go back to the top and going to bring in the guitars on this pass as well. What I generally do at mixing stage is to put everything in, excluding the bass and drums, so that I can tell that we're hearing everything that's going on, because the because bass and drums are always so dominant in rock and roll and pop music that you really need to sort of address the musical stuff as a separate process. So there's Tim's chugging tracks. There are the power chords, which are on separate tracks. Now we've actually got 4 tracks of chugging, but they, in the chorus they do different things. So that's the point where the organ comes in. There's the solo. Tim had a lot of repeat echo on that solo, but I'm still probably going to apply reverb to it just to put it in a bigger space when we get further into the mix. I'm just dealing with balance right now. Just about the only thing I haven't yet brought in is the percussion, which is all this stuff. So I'll deal with that on the next pass. And the shakers stop when the tambourine starts, right? Okay.
Most consumers find it hard to grasp the really quite simple concept that stereo is made up of a panorama of sounds spread between the left and right speakers. The pan pots, as we call them on the console, allow us to move each source anywhere from extreme left to extreme right. We're not changing the volume of the sound, just its position in the stereo image. Different stereo pan positions are based upon how much of a sound is being fed to each speaker. With the pan pot set to extreme left, the right speaker has no information at all. Moving the pan pot to the center, the sound is heard as a phantom center image between the speakers. Continuing to move the pan pot to extreme right position means that the right channel will get gradually louder and the left channel correspondingly quieter until at extreme right, no sound is present in the left speaker. Let's see how we can build up a stereo picture for the drums.
So there's the first one. The first one in the series seems to be that number 2, so I'm going to put that hard left. Next one is 3, so I've got that sort of half left. Next one I'm going to put center, or just slightly left of center. Next one I'll put slightly right of center. And the bottom one, I'll put that dead center. No, I won't. I'm going to put it on the right, because I think it'll probably work best in stereo like that. That's kind of a sort of ideal loop we've got going there, because he's hitting every tom, and it actually forms the basis for the verse of the song, which is really good. I'll just cut those now, and then we've got the ambience mics, which are currently panned center, so I'll pan those left and right. Can we hear them individually? That's sounding rather mono at the moment. It doesn't seem to have much stereo spread. Let's hear the other one. I'm going to reverse those, because in order to duplicate the panning I've got of the individual toms, that seems to be correct. My guess is those are probably the 2 mics that were behind the kit. Back in again. Yeah, let's kill the first one. All right, we can let it run again now. Now, when I solo the snare, it's going to have a completely different sound to how it sounds when it's mixed into the whole kit, so it's always worth bearing that in mind, that the snare mic is probably never ever going to sound very good on its own, but in the context it's sounding pretty good. In surround, we have panning between 5 speakers to consider, and an additional sub-bass channel to contend with. Surround panning on a console is usually done with a joystick control, and on a DAW by a graphic equivalent of a joystick. An important aspect of mixing is the choice and application of reverbs, delays, and other audio goodies. The choice of reverb, especially on the vocal, will set the scene and give the listener an impression of the size and type of space that the music is being played in.
Different types of equipment that all has different types of feelings and perspectives and sounds. And I like making a collage of what I think is the best of the different pieces of equipment. Not only that, each piece of equipment has a sound and an attitude and a perspective that another piece of equipment doesn't have. So I like the idea of what I always say, I like the idea of having the box of 64 Crayolas as opposed to 8. And I could take the red and the green and put them together and make a color, but having 64 makes that color that I might put together with the red and green, and then even yet another hue, tone, or shade.
I haven't felt the need to EQ anything yet, but that might change. Okay, for the first time I'm feeling that we're a little lacking brightness on the drums, so I'm going to put some EQ in on the overheads to give us a little more splashiness on the cymbals. So we haven't got any cymbals yet, but they'll be there soon. That's fairly extreme there. That's without EQ. That's with EQ, but we'll see how that sounds in the mix. If I take that EQ out, you can hear that the crashes are barely there, but with the EQ in, the crashes are much more evident.
But usually once everything gets in, I'm either changing a little bit of the EQ on the bass or a little bit of the EQ on the kick. I generally use the Steinberg EQ, because I really like the way it sounds and what it does and how gentle it can be.
I'm getting a slight sort of booming effect from the bass, so I'm going to try and take care of that right now with a bit of EQ. Alan Sides told me that this room goes down to 18 hertz, so we're getting plenty of bass, but I just want to make sure that when we get out of here, we're still going to be able to hear that bass. So I'm going to add some, probably some low middle frequency. It's kind of that kind of frequency I'm looking for. So that's actually lower than I said. It's somewhere around 400 hertz, that frequency. But I've got it on a fairly gentle curve. There's the un-EQ'd sound. And that's what I've done to it. It's brought up the level significantly, so I might back off the level a little bit. We're hearing the bass fills better now as well. There's one coming up. It's my favourite thing in the whole track, that bass fill. Love that. I'm going to put a little echo on that percussion. So we've put that tambourine in a little bit of its, a little bit of a room space now. Same with the guitar. Although I didn't do it on this occasion, I'll usually establish a reverb type for the vocal first, and then think about what instruments need similar treatment. Sometimes I'll bring up a different style of reverb so that certain instruments can appear to be in a different space, if that works for the song.
A lot of the times when I get music to mix, I try and think about this being recorded in one room at the same time. That's the way I grew up. That's the way I think music works best, when you see musicians working off one another and playing things that they probably wouldn't have played, but the bass player played something and the guitar player was motivated by that lick to do something else. They don't have that benefit. A lot of times you don't get that benefit, but you try and create that idea in the studio, like all these guys played at the same time.
Okay, just to put things into perspective, we've probably been mixing seriously about an hour now, and we're at the stage where we've got a pretty good overall balance of all the instruments, bass and drums mixed in, sounding nice with everything else. I would normally spend time looking at the lead vocal and solos on their own before adding them to the mix, in the same way you would check the quality of the main ingredient before adding it to the mixing bowl. The reverb that I've got on the drums and percussion and on the guitar is sounding pretty nice. Probably the first thing I'll do is try the same reverb on the voice. But we'll probably do a pass just to listen to the voice or the voices on their own.
Reverbs and delays are often governed by the style of the music, which will most likely have been established during the recording. A mix session is a good time to experiment if you haven't found the perfect vocal sound by now. But if the effect you've been listening to during the recording works, don't tempt disaster by tweaking minute details. It's a mistake to feel you need to change just because you're mixing. The if it ain't broke rule can apply to the mix as a whole too.
And a lot of times, I tell you, man, the tracking rough has been the the mix of the track, because they're just being impulsive and just throwing things up and flying by the seat of their pants. And it's so amazing when I like that, they get upset. They go, man, it was a rough mix. And I go, but it was your rough mix, and I love it. You should be flattered and say, God, thanks, man, as opposed to getting upset with me for taking a rough mix.
Once you've achieved what you feel is a good drum balance, it's useful to group the drums together so that a single fader will push all the drums at a set balance together. On a large analog console, this may be possible using VCA groups, which I'll tell you all about some other time. Digital consoles take all this in their stride, and you can even group the groups.
If I have maybe 20 backing vocals, instead of bringing up all the backing vocals on the console, I'll bring them up in Pro Tools, I'll EQ them, compress them, process them in Pro Tools, bring them up on the console in stereo, and it makes my console mix a lot easier to deal with. Sometimes I'll have the entire drum kit come up in stereo. So I'll have stereo groups come up and then work within, use the console for my summing, which is why people ask me to use the console in the first place.
Similar to groups in that they're combinations of tracks submixed to a stereo pair are stems, which are often created within the mix so that key elements of the track can be rebalanced later on.
These are groups of like-minded instruments or sounds. In other words, all the keyboards, all the guitars, all the backing vocals, drums, strings, and so on, complete with their reverbs and effects. It's often sensible to leave the bass as a separate stem. When all the stems are added together at the same level, you should theoretically end up with the same balance as on your composite mix. I think it's vital, once you've finished the mix, to run off an instrumental backing track or a mix without the lead vocal. This has a dual purpose. Firstly, the track can be used for TV, where the artist performs the vocal live, karaoke style. The other advantage of having a backing track is that we avoid having to set up the whole mix again when the A&R man at the label says the vocals aren't loud enough. We can then recombine the vocal with the backing track anytime we want to.
Labels will often hire a remix engineer to work from stems, as opposed to working from the original multitrack.
Yes, my work gets farmed out to other mixers, and usually it gets farmed out after I've already mixed it, and I've given them stems of my mix, and all they have to do is basically put what I just described to you. Just kind of open it up and just fix all the little things, and then they'll call it their mix. That's kind of the new world as well. And I'm not bitter over it, because it's what it is.
There's another advantage to having everything sound good when you push up those faders, because if your project leaves your hands and goes to another mixer or another engineer, it's very little that they can screw up. And also, if you've summed all these drums to a stereo pair like the toms, everything will be placed the way that you intended on it being placed when you recorded it. My strategy for recording these days is to record everything in a way where if you just push up these faders, monitoring back what you've recorded, and you have panning in pairs, that everything just is pre-mixed. Not that it would have a bunch of effects like delay or anything on it, but that the sounds are recorded in such a way that there's very little work to do to get the basics sounding good. I also like using an Auratone, but not near the console. I prefer to have a single Auratone in the back of the room, maybe pointed to the wall, and to monitor at low level, just to make sure I can, depending on the music, I can hear the vocal. If I need to hear the vocal for a television style mix, that I can hear it. But away from the console, often in the corner.
One of the things I've always done is to step outside the room.
Right.
I just listen to your mix from the passageway outside, and if it sounds reasonable down
Right.
there, and that's the trick Jeff Emmerich taught me.
Is that right?
He did it that way. He always managed to leave the room and just listen to make sure that everything was there, and that the vocal was at the right balance and so on.
Right.
This is what I like the most, is a Bose Wave radio. The little wave radio? Well, if I do my final mix on there, that my mix will be competitive, and that if you listen to it on your iPhone and in headphones, and if you listen to it on your computer, it's going to sound right. So,
all right, I won't tell Alan Sides that that you won't be buying one of his $200,000 speakers.
No, I mean, what's the sense? I mean, I love it too, and boy, I mean, I like to have. I'm as crazy about masturbation as anybody, but I mean, really, no one is listening like that at that level. So I try to make that kind of depth and fidelity work in that little wave monitor, and when I do, it's rocking everywhere.
It's important that the mix we deliver is at a level comfortably below the distortion threshold. If we don't allow enough headroom, even if the meters tell us that we're at a comfortable level, we might still actually be dangerously close to distortion on transient or percussive sounds. If you're using VU meters as your level reference, 0 VU should be somewhere between 12 and 16 dB below digital 0. I use -14. You can calibrate your system to the required level by using a professional test disc like Soundcheck. Although a good balance is a good balance, there are other parameters that need to be taken into consideration. One of these is what I call spectral response. In other words, is the sound of our mix going to stand up against other commercial recordings? This tends to be a fashion thing. At one moment in time, mixes may tend to be very bright, or on another, be completely dominated by a thumping kick drum. This is where we have to decide whether the entire mix needs EQ, compression, and of course the big debate in the industry, how loud should it be? This hot topic has become known in the industry as the level war.
At some point in my career, maybe it does 10 to 12 years ago, I was using bus compression and bus EQ on the stereo mixes. I guess 4 or 5 years ago, I eliminated the bus EQ. You know, I felt it was way too much, way over the top. I do keep the bus compression. I got to say, as far as the bus compression goes, it's not to compress the mix. It's more for the sound of the device. You know, just, it'll catch occasional peaks, but it's barely hitting the mix. I use a Neve 33609, and I really like the way that particular box sounds. And so I use that across all my mixes. I have it in my home studio. I go out, I go D to A to D. You know, just because I like what that box does.
Call me old school if you like, but you won't find a compressor on my mix bus. I think decisions like this are best left until the mastering stage. Mastering engineers are well equipped to make judgments about these elements, particularly in the context of current trends. Different processes might be needed for online delivery, CD, TV, radio, and other media.
One trick that I learned from Rick Rubin for mixing with automation is something that he calls a slippery fader. And that's where you take, when your mix is nearly finished, if you want to give the choruses an extra punch, you just take your master fader, your stereo bus fader, and you just give it a little boost right on the choruses or in a bridge or wherever you want it. Just give it a little more excitement. And it's so subtle that you can't really hear it, but you feel it. And I thought that was always a really great way to use automation.
Well, we've been mixing here at Record One a couple of hours now. The mixes come together pretty nicely. It's really nice, I have to say, to be back in front of a big console and to have each individual sound on a fader that you can touch and feel, which is something that in the hard disk circles has been something I miss. But great to be in front of an SSL again. Been a while, and you really do get a different perspective on how sounds are being combined. You get a really good visual indication. I mean, that's one of the things about a full-blown console like this. You can see right in front of you what's happening to each sound at every stage. So that's really nice. So we're going to print this mix now and put it back onto the hard disk, and hopefully when we come back in the cold light of day, it'll be a mix that we say is going to be on the final mix of this DVD. So good luck, studio. If we chose to, we could run a tape machine of some sort, you know, maybe a 1/2-inch tape machine, just so we had it in analog form. But main thing is we're going to just see what the experience is of combining the tracks with faders in front of me, which you know, very tactile environment, which I've often found that I miss in the hard disk systems of the current day.
I'm still mixing to tape only because it's the only time that anything sees tape at this point. And sometimes it can be great. Look, it's like anything, you know. I think to speak in absolutes is idiotic. Digital has everything that's wonderful about it, so does analog. Neither one's better than the other one. It's sort of like the blonde and the brunette. Sometimes you like both, and sometimes you have your eye on the redhead, and that's equally as great. So my style has always been pinching from the different decades and pinching from the different styles.
The idea of taking notes has been completely forgotten about. You know, I know that some of the schools still teach it. I don't know if it's these kids come out and they just ignore it, or, you know, it's once they get into the studio, it's nobody's telling them, you know, please keep a track sheet or keep notes or something. You never get any of the benefit of that. I don't think that's a problem anymore, no. except with consolidation. You know, that's. I guess if you keep notes in like the files that you're using on another proprietary system, you don't get the benefit of that. At least I don't know of any way of getting that. You know, like I've seen occasions like in DigiFiles where under the track they'll write a little note here and that, you know, use this in second course only or something, but generally I haven't seen anything that transfers over like that. So that could be a cross-platform issue, which reinforces more the need for somebody to take physical notes.
And my example would be like if I got a tape from you to mix something, which would never happen because you'd mix it fine by yourself. But should that happen, I know what I'm going to. I can tell you what I'm going to expect to see. If it was a multi-track, I'm going to expect to see X amount of tracks. They're going to be laid out, their effects with them, and so forth. And pretty much I can put it down, open it up on the board, and then right off the bat, I've got a basic record I can now play. And now I can do what I need to do. As opposed to, what I will expect today is I will expect a file from here, a file from here, a file from here, a file from here, and a file from here, and I got to put them all together. There's duplicates. They're not really duplicate because he punched in one line on one of those ones. Well, which one is it? Well, I don't know. You have to listen to it and find out. So now I'm sitting here listening and comparing for half my time, most of my time, just listening and comparing. I'll do a mix, and they'll go, "Did you listen to the rough?" Actually, I didn't want to listen to the rough. I wanted to give you what I thought it should be. Oh, we love the rough. We love the rough. Don't you understand that? So now I'm sitting and comparing everything in the rough to all the stuff, and now, you know what? I'm not giving you anything that I wanted to give you because I'm tired.
The mix is the final statement, the culmination of all the work you've put into your track. Is your mix just a formality representing what you've been building up with tracking, overdubs, and refinements? Or is it a complete reassessment of what you've recorded? Or a revamp of work created by someone else? Whatever happens, it's important to make sure the mix contains your stamp and your personality.
Stakes are high. We have to seize the chance. case of do or die. This is our last dance. A moment's hesitation and we always pay the price. Hiding in the wings is just like walking on thin ice. All our yesterdays will soon be ended. Hide the walking shadow on the stage. All our yesterdays be soon forgotten. There's an easy way to turn the page. The vision is too real. The prize is there to take. We're on an even keel. No demons in our way. If you stack the cards, you will one day find your heaven. Both sides of the dice are always adding up to 7. All our yesterdays will soon be ended. Hide the walking shadow on the stage. All our yesterdays be soon forgotten. There's an easy way to turn the page. Yesterday's tomorrow is tomorrow's yesterday. Destiny's forgotten, there's another game to play. No more future perfect, we just need the present tense. All our yesterdays are only hanging in suspense. The banners high on the outward walls. The battle's lost and won. That's when the hammer falls. Blazing to the future, we must never lose our way. All we have to do is take tomorrow